the latest CMIE data on investments shows a sharp drop in new projects. Project completions have also dropped to a 3-year low, but there is a little bit of good news when it comes to stalled projects. Joining us now to help read those numbers and interpret what they mean for the economy is Mahesh Vyas, the Managing Director and CEO of CMIE. Mahesh, thanks very much for joining us this morning. This new project data seems to be very disappointing, largely on account of a pullback from the government's point of view. Can you talk us through what the detailed numbers are and what your interpretation of them is?
Well, in a way they are disappointing, and in a way they are expected. So they are disappointing because they are low, and they are much lower than they have been in the past. And if you remove the effect of two large projects which are to purchase aircraft, then the new proposals for investments drop really to a very, very small number. It's less than like 700 billion rupees only. That's really very small. So that is very disappointing, but this is not entirely unexpected. So it is very, very unlikely that new investment proposals will pick up. The only thing we can hope and be happy about that the numbers don't fall too much. The government and private sector both have withdrawn. If you see an increase in the private sector, it's only because Jet Airways is buying aircraft. That's very different from a usual plant and machinery or an infrastructure project coming up. Right. So there is a big demand for airline services. Most airlines do go full, so they are increasing their capacity. So there's a little skewness. Airlines are doing well, automobile companies are doing quite well as well, but the economy as a whole is not doing very well, and investments ain't coming up over there.
Okay.
So there is a disappointment, but at the same time, it's not too difficult to understand where these numbers are coming from.
Okay, what explains the dramatic drop in government-led new projects? Is that something you had anticipated anyways?
See, in the recent past, the government and private sector seem to be moving in tandem. When investments go down, both go down. When investments rise a bit, both do rise. So that means that the government and the private sector are responding to markets situation. For example, if government is a major investor into power sector, then you see that plant load factor of thermal power plants is close to 60-65%. That's really very low, and one wouldn't expect government or private sector to invest more into the power sector. Capacity utilization in general is around 70-74%, which is very low, and it cannot enthuse government or private sector to go and invest. The disappointment from the government side, and we are disappointed over here, is that government investments into the road sector has declined this quarter. And the road sector has seen a drop which was not called for. So if there's a disappointment, I think it is in the road sector where we see a fall in new investment proposals and in awards being given out for roads as well.
Okay, two quick follow-up questions there. When you say roads, you obviously mean that so no new road projects have been awarded or started. Is that how one would interpret it? And then I want to talk a little bit about the capacity utilization number as well.
Okay, so there is a clear increase in the completion of projects. So we see numbers given out by the government which show that 22 kilometers of roads are laid every day, compared to 16 kilometers before that, and even lesser at 12 kilometers before that. So there's a big ramp up, commendable big ramp up on the implementation of roads project. But in the last year, we saw a sharp drop in awards for new projects being given out, which I think was only 8,000 kilometers in 17-18, compared to 15,000 kilometers in the year before. So the awards for new roads to be built has come down. Now that's surprising. And in the quarter of June 18, we see a drop in the number of new roads projects being announced. So we are a bit taken aback. We're surprised over this apparent scaling back of the government and announcing new roads. We certainly do require more roads.
Yeah, also
on capacity utilization, this has been a problem for a long time. Sorry?
No, it's also concerning because, roads and that level of infrastructure was really where the big thrust of the government expenditure was coming in. And so this is a little surprising to me as well. On capacity utilization, I had a pointed question. In the monetary policy statement, the last one, there was a suggestion by the Reserve Bank of India when explaining, or the Monetary Policy Committee when explaining the increase in rates, that they had seen a bump up in capacity utilization. We don't have all the numbers as yet. Are you seeing that happen at all?
So the RBI's Obicus,
yes.
That's the survey that they use to measure capacity utilization. The last number they gave out was in December 17, if I am not wrong.
Right.
That was 74%. 74% is only slightly higher than 70% seen earlier, and we haven't seen more recent numbers. There should have been more recent numbers, but they haven't come out as yet. But 74% is nowhere close to the capacity that the industry will feel enthused about to put up new capacity. There's still too much slack. We have seen 74% many times in the past, and we haven't seen an increase in investments following that. We require capacity utilization to go up beyond 80 before we see really new capacities being built aggressively.
Okay. On the project completion side as well, the data was not very good. You made the mention of roads, but broadly speaking, the numbers have come down across the board. Whereas when it comes to stalled projects, I think there has been some slight, somewhat, improvement, one might put it that way. Again, what color can you add so that we get a better understanding of how to interpret this data?
So you see, when you see low capacity utilization, and when you get into a pre-election year, and there are state government elections, which many of them are actually resource rich, then investments into resource intensive projects will obviously slow down because in the last few months, the uncertainty regarding the outcome of the 2019 elections or 18 elections has increased. So in these uncertain times, industrialists would rather wait to see what the verdict is before they make any aggressive announcement for new investments. This is a new thing that has happened. But in general, if you have a capacity hangover, you have a large capacity which is unutilized, then obviously you will delay your new investment announcements and also the implementation of the existing capacities. Till domestic demand does not pick up, I think we are going to see a slowdown. There is also some stress over banks, and there is some stress over some industries and companies that will not be able to raise resources. But I think the main problem is not the banking sector. It is not the balance sheet of the companies. The main problem is demand needs to pick up. And that we will have to wait to see for a year more before we see the numbers picking up.
So there are many different messages we get, Mr. Vyas, on the economy, and sometimes it's difficult to put together in one clear picture. You're saying that we haven't seen demand pick up, but there are inflationary pressures that the MPC is worried about in terms of pricing. I'm not saying they're both linearly connected, but I'm trying to draw a cogent picture of this economy as we stand today. There was the expectation that government expenditure would drive the rest of this year, especially as we go into the elections for 2019. But the data seems to suggest that they've pulled back in the recent past. There was hope, again, in the MPC statement that output gaps have reduced, capacity utilization has gone up. But that doesn't seem to be the case when you contrast that with new project announcements, because if that were the case, then there would be probably a slight improvement in new project announcements. So it's really tough to make out where we stand today. Anecdotally, industrialists, businessmen tell us that they are looking at some brownfield expansion, if not large greenfield projects. What's your sense of where we are today?
Well, the numbers that we see show that jobs are not growing, investments are not growing. RBI's numbers show that capacity utilization is low. Low inflation is also an indication that demand is not very robust. So the answer is pretty clear to me that the economy is in a slack position. It requires to be pumped up. The government is not enthusiastic in increasing its fiscal deficit, or not the fiscal deficit, not willing to spend more. So we are kind of in I would call it a limbo, wherein there are no stimuli from either the RBI or the government, and the private sector is waiting for demand to pick up. So I think we are just in a limbo where the economy is not accelerating. I would disagree with the Reserve Bank of India's analysis that there is a pickup in growth. There isn't any. So if you say 7.5% is what we were looking at in the last quarter, and that's what we are going by, I think that is stretching it, because all of the numbers, whether on whether on jobs or on investments, don't show that the economy is picking up.
And do you think, last question, do you think that a good monsoon and therefore enhanced rural demand, this increase in minimum support prices that was announced yesterday, any of this could help alleviate this to some extent?
I'm quite hopeful on the MSP announcements of yesterday.
Okay.
That should make a difference. It's not that I'm in agreement with the policy of MSPs in general. All I'm saying is, taking an extremely short-term view, we see that sowing this year has been very poor in the first month of the Kharif sowing season. So I think sowing was close to 20% low compared to a year ago. And that's quite bad. Rains ain't so bad as to cause a 20% drop in sowing year-on-year comparison. So the bigger factor which seems to hold back the Kharif sowings is low agricultural product prices. So arhar and tul and pulses in general, the prices are lesser, market prices are lesser than they were a year ago and even 2 years ago. So with these low prices, farmers are not very enthused to go ahead and sow aggressively pulses which you require in big measure. The story on cereals was no better. Bajra in particular was quite low, but that's a late sowing crop, so maybe it'll pick up. But it's nice to see, in a sense, that the MSPs given out are very aggressive, extremely aggressive actually, for Bajra, for the pulses as well. And hopefully that will lead to some increase in sowing. The prices need to hold. The government hasn't been very clear in its announcement on how will these MSPs actually land up in the hands of the farmers. They say they're going to talk to the central government and state government agencies and work this out. So there's a little uncertainty over there. So not being too skeptical over there, I think there is some hope because of the MSP.
Yeah, there's also, I think some regret that has been expressed by a few economists that this announcement has come, after the sowing season started already for some Kharif crops. So there's that regret. But nonetheless, all of this put together, do you think could boost the rural economy enough to help meaningfully change your perception of absolutely no momentum in this economy, no acceleration?
No, this is not enough. This will help, but this is not enough. So this is not going to change the mood entirely. MSP is not a game changer.
No, it isn't. I was just,
it's far away from there. It's a positive step from a short-term perspective.